Hey everyone, this is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. I've got Mr. Scott Stouffer from a company called scaleMatters. They're at scaleMatters.com, and we're going to talk today about optimization. We're going to talk about how to kind of analyze things so that you can not just have top line revenue, but you can optimize your revenue. Now, whether you're selling, in a sales role, or you're the CEO of the company, or whether you're somebody internally in a different department or different division, please write this down. Optimization matters. Why? It matters because it's the difference in profitability. It's also the difference in frustration levels. In other words, when things are moving along smooth and you're making as much money as you can out of your initiatives, it's a really happy day. So without further ado, let's go speak to Scott, and we're going to talk about modeling as well toward the end of this particular podcast. So I think you'll all get a lot out of that modeling side. So let's go talk to Scott now. Hey, Scott, welcome to the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
Doug, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, why don't you tell everybody what you do and what your company does, and we can set the frame for this call.
Sure. Company is called scaleMatters. I guess you could think of us as playing in the broader revenue intelligence market space. Specifically, we provide a platform and some associated services that is effectively a purpose-built BI platform for go-to-market leaders of B2B growth stage companies. And what they use us for in particular is to help optimize their go-to-market motions, and specifically within that by identifying friction, right? Finding the things that are working, finding the things that aren't working, understanding the why behind it, and then using our platform to help optimize their overall go-to-market approach.
BI, that's business intelligence, correct?
Yes.
And friction, what would you give a definition for friction?
Friction, I mean, I use friction or inefficiencies interchangeably, and I'd say there's two impacts or three impacts. Friction could be things where you're just wasting money, sales money or marketing money, right? You're spending marketing dollars attracting people that aren't good fit prospects for you, right? That could be friction. It could also be things that are causing revenue leakage, causing conversion rates to be depressed, right? Or cycle times to be elongated. So it's basically anything that is diminishing the return that companies are getting on their sales and marketing investments.
So if I understand this correctly, I'm spending money on marketing. I'm getting, leads, but not sales qualified leads. And I'm having my sales force or myself as a salesperson run around chasing people who basically aren't really that qualified for me. But I'm spending, $10,000 a month on leads or whatever, or 50, $100 million, whatever it is on leads. But I'm not really getting the return. And then on the other side of it, let's say my leads are sort of qualified, but I'm getting there. I might be having revenue leakage by not being able to sell certain things within upsells, cross sells, down sells, or maybe my process for selling is like,
the process. A very common thing in the bottom of the funnel that we see is during the quoting and contracting stage. A lot of growth stage companies don't have a very efficient approach to that, and so there might be 6 steps, and two of them might be manual, where salespeople are manually adjusting quotes, and then the errors come into play, and then customers get frustrated, right? And if that process isn't done very well, you'll end up with certain customers just bailing because they kind of is an indication that maybe this company doesn't actually have its act together, right? So that could be a process issue. You could have a process issue in the handoff and follow-up of leads, right? If it isn't done in a way that's super timely, right? Value of leads decays very quickly, right? Because especially an inbound lead, if somebody submits a demo request, I mean, they're sort of in a purchase consideration at that moment. They submit the demo request, and if they get a response from you 6 days later, I mean, they've already forgotten, right? And so that's process issue, right? Where if that is not dialed in, you're just going to get leakage.
So I just had this happen to me. And when you were saying that, I wrote it down. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I had a person who cold contacted me. And they did a nice job cold contacting me. They went through all the work. They started with email, and then we kind of progressed and we had a conversation. And then it went to a demo and a quote stage, and everything was fine. And the person's supposed to be sending me some information on the quote, but they never did, and they never followed up. Now it's not an inexpensive purchase for us. It's a sizable purchase, but they didn't follow up, and they didn't do that. Is this an example of, where somewhere in the process the ball is getting dropped? Because we're at the point, we just had a meeting yesterday and we're going, nah, we don't trust this guy anymore.
Well, that could be, I mean, that may not be a process issue. That may just simply be an individual performer issue, right? Which is also, I mean, if you think about inefficiencies in go-to-market, they could be related to your strategies, your messaging, your processes, your people. That may just be a people-related issue, right? But nevertheless, it's ending up potentially with revenue leakage that was almost a done deal, right?
Yeah. So I have a question, which is, should the process actually maintain the people? Like, should there be a process in this case that said, once we submit this quote process, we have X amount of time in which to get an answer or follow up? Should that be part of the process?
That should be part of the process, but then you need technology to enforce that. Yes. Right? Just documenting a process, if you don't have a way to measure compliance with it, doesn't do anything for you, right? And so that is a big role that technology can play in helping teams optimize their go-to-market motion, is by measuring certain things that ensure compliance with the processes that have been designed, or at least they don't necessarily ensure compliance, but they highlight non-compliance, right? That's the thing that can happen, is that you can be alerted to non-compliance, which then you can take actions to resolve.
But getting real-time insights into this data, I mean, it's significant. And the reason I bring this up is I think a lot of people, many companies, they kind of downplay the value of the data-driven process because they don't really understand. And conceptually, they all get it. Like, well, if we track everything should be much more efficient and we should get this. But they don't implement this enough. And then they'll hire a guy like me or, one of my constituents to come through. And we're going, geez, your leads haven't been followed up on in 3 weeks. My goodness, look at all the dormant clients who haven't been contacted in X amount of time. Or why are we going from stage 1 to stage 2, but it's not going from stage 2 to 3, 43% of the time, things like that. But having real-time intelligence tells us like real time, right? I mean, because that's revenue lost. It's leakage that is completely lost. But then we have to say, as a business owner or a salesperson, I lost those sales. So now I got to make up other sales to make them up. But I have a cost of acquisition on every sale. So it's not just one sale I'm losing to make it up. I might have to make up 5 or 6 or 7 sales to actually make up on the initial revenue leakage. Am I thinking correctly, or am I incorrect?
You're absolutely thinking correctly. I think where the gap is, as you said, everyone buys into it makes sense to measure stuff, right? Everyone also likes to think of themselves as data driven. The problem is that there's a sizable investment to be data driven. And it's really in 2 places. One is producing legitimate data. And so if you think about in the go-to-market world, the data gets generated out of the tech stack, the CRM, the marketing automation platform, the sales cadence tool, the call recording tool, right? All of these tools, while they're sort of built to automate some function, they end up being generators of data. The vast majority of early and growth stage companies do not do a particularly good job at strategically configuring those tools so they generate the data that they actually need. And so, what you'll often see is, very common thing in companies where alignment between sales and marketing isn't pristine. You get marketing folks operating off of data in the marketing automation platform like Marketo or HubSpot or Pardot or something. You get salespeople operating out of data that's in the Salesforce, the CRM.
Right.
And the data conflicts with each other, right? And so they end up spending energy arguing about the data rather than interpreting it and saying, okay, given that, what should we now do to make our process better, right? And so you have this issue that many companies do not strategically architect their tech stack to produce the right data to begin with. The second problem with the data is that companies are notorious for data hygiene issues. And what do I mean by that? If you say that the predominant source of data is the CRM, well, most of the data in the CRM is created by the way salespeople interact with the CRM.
Yep.
And if you have complete inconsistency across the sales team with how they use the CRM, then the data is the integrity of the data is undermined, from the get-go. So you have to, if you're really going to be sophisticated, at dialing in your go-to-market functional efficiency by leveraging data, then you have to be very thoughtful and strategic to make sure that you've got good data to leverage. The second part of the challenge of these companies when it comes to data is the process of analyzing. Somebody still has to put eyes on it. I mean, tools like ours or other revenue intelligence tools or BI tools, I mean, they're doing a great job, visualizing data in a way that it starts to make it easier to interpret. But somebody still has to put eyes on it, right? I use the analogy, like, let's say you have the world's highest resolution MRI machine and you get this MRI image. I mean, if I looked at it, I wouldn't know what I was looking at. You still need a radiologist, right? To look at the thing and say, here's what this means and here's what we ought to do to treat it. And that's an analytical skill set. When it comes to go-to-market teams, right? And I mean, the sales leader certainly doesn't have the time to be the business analyst, and in most cases, sales leaders actually don't have the analytical, right? That's not really the bend they come from. We do see marketing leaders tend to maybe be a little bit more analytical, but they don't have the time. So if you don't have somebody that fundamentally has the time and skill set to put eyes on the data and separate the signal from the noise so that they basically can curate insights for the senior leadership team, then it's all kind of rendered moot to begin with. And that's what we see in kind of, we focus on really growth stage B2B companies, and just the vast majority of them haven't got the data thing right, both in terms of the data itself and then the process of analyzing it, which is why they don't give lip service to the fact that they're data driven.
So what I'm hearing is this is like management that's managing from the top line, like top line revenue or top line, end of year. Hey, we made a profit. We made whatever, versus an optimized process, which says, okay, we made a profit plus what we dropped, right? In other words, let me rephrase that. A lot of times I see companies look at it and they go, okay, you know what? We're better this quarter. We're doing good, but what they're not looking at is they're not looking at how good should they actually have done? Like that optimization component of it might be the difference between a swing in 10% profitability in that quarter or that whatever period we're measuring. And so when I because we talk a lot about, being a 1% earner here or being a 1% company. So if we want to be in the top 1%, that means we've got to be healthy at all levels. And people who aren't measuring these things are never going to be likely in the top 1%. I mean, I have not worked with, say, a company like Apple, but I mean, they're a pretty profitable company from all published reports, right? So, and you said something like the value of leads declines quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that they're not at that stage where they can have this perfect analyzation, person in there or whatever, but they can still look at things like, okay, lead time came in here and we're responding at this, and we closed this many people from responding at this time, and we lost this many people because we responded at this time. They can still look at a metric like that, correct?
Provided they have configured their tech stack to measure that, yes.
Okay.
Right. But that, I mean, that in itself requires thought. That thought is, okay, we need to measure response time to leads. How are we going to do that? Right. So you need to think through, how do we do that? Right. What triggers are we going to see in which tool that we can use as a indicator of that? Then to your point of, now we want to correlate response time to win rate, right? How are we going to do that? You have to, it's like any science project, right? You have to design how you're going to measure stuff. Because none of these tools just innately do it out of the gate. They give you the capability of doing it, but you have to decide, how do we actually manipulate this tool so that it is measuring the stuff that we want to measure. Who thinks about that, right? I mean, the people that think about that are RevOps people, right? Or data analysts. The first sales leader is not thinking about that. He or she is thinking about, I need to hire some heavy hitter salespeople. I need to pound on marketing or build an SDR team so we can start getting some meetings set up. They're not thinking about, where are the dials I'm going to have to turn, typically. Right. I mean, certainly at larger companies that are more established and you've started to get this culture around efficiency and optimization, that happens. But when you're looking at sub couple $100 million companies, in many cases they're just very immature on this. I can tell you one thing: the companies that are really good at this, and I'll say this is scaling efficiently, right? Your 1%, if you will. There's a couple things that we see. One is there's this almost religious attention to finding friction, and they have built the data infrastructure to support that, right? So they're constantly looking for, where are the choke points, where is the friction, where are the points of inefficiency, and then they align themselves on the highest impact friction, right? So there's no point if on the go-to-market side, your biggest choke point is deep in the bottom of funnel, maybe at the contract and quoting stage.
Right.
Let's rally all of our efforts at fixing that before we worry about whether we're throwing more stuff in the top of funnel.
Right.
Right. And that's a very it's a very different mindset. It's a focus on what matters mindset at these companies. So find the friction, focus on what matters. And then the other thing that we see that's very common in these top performing companies is a constant experimentation culture. So basically, we find the friction, we look at the stuff that's most impactful, and then we build experiments to try to eliminate that friction. And they're just constantly going through that motion, and they do it very, very quickly. The one thing that separates them on the experimentation side is they're actually disciplined about it. And you've heard me talk before about the phrase, what we call conscious iteration at speed. Everybody's go-to-market function is just perpetually iterating, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what we do because we always are trying to get better, and we do that by iterating. The difference between sort of best-in-class companies and everybody else is the level of consciousness to which that process of iterating or experimenting has risen. And so, for example, they are very clear about, okay, we're going to try this. Let's call it an experiment. Here's the hypothesis of why we're doing that and what we expect the outcome to be. Here is exactly how we're going to measure it, right? And they document this stuff. Here is exactly how we're going to measure this experiment to know whether it's having the desired outcome or not. Here's how long it's going to last. Here's the pass-fail criteria. And they're doing that all the time, and they're able to make sure that they aren't running conflicting experiments then that might make the outcomes ambiguous, right? Because then you don't know which one's having the impact or not. So contrast that with the 99% of companies that just constantly try new stuff, but they aren't very thoughtful about how are they actually going to measure whether that new stuff is working or not. And so they've got all these initiatives that continue to go on, many of which are having no positive impact, and they're just wasting money on them, but they don't have a way to tell because they never designed it properly to begin with.
Speaking with Mr. Scott Stouffer, the company's called scaleMatters. Scale, scaleMatters.com. I don't know if this is a fair question, Scott, but how do you design it? Because when you're talking, right? I see companies do this all the time. Let's go hire an SDR team. We'll go outbound. 4 months go later, they go, we're losing money on this. And they go, kill it. But what they never have done is measured why. Why is this not working from month one or month, and it goes back to the design, I believe, based on what you were just saying, right? There were no real points where they said, look, we're going to measure this or that or this. All we're looking at is how many leads we got, how much we converted, how much we didn't convert. That was kind of the measurement side of it.
Well, they didn't probably model it properly to begin with, right? Because like one of the things we do with all of our customers is we try to get them to model everything in great detail, right? Because that's effectively codifying your set of assumptions. And so if we are going to, we think outbound may work and we want to do an initiative to establish an SDR program, et cetera, then model it, right? Start with how long is it going to take us to hire these people? How long is it going to take them to ramp? What does ramp look like, right? Are we measuring ramp in terms of number of calls they're making or in terms of number of first meetings they're setting up? Let's say we're going to do it in terms of first meeting setup. Okay, what do we think that ramp should look like? So if you basically build the model, first of all, sometimes you'll build your model and you'll look at it and say, well, even if it works like this isn't any good for us, right? That's one of the benefits of modeling to begin with, is it actually saves you going down the road of something that's likely not to be useful anyway. But then you make sure that you can measure against the very things that you modeled into the thing, because that's how you're in real time able to sort of test your assumptions, right? You don't have to wait 4, 5, 6 months. But when you model it, I mean, realistically, in this particular example, realistically, your model should say that this thing won't be productive for about 8 or 9 months, right? Nobody should expect an SDR program to be productive in 4 months. That's silly in my mind. But that's part of the problem. If you don't model things, then you go into them with unrealistic expectations.
And that's a really good point, because a lot of companies that I have see or talked to, they do things like that. They'll come in and they'll go out quickly, but they've never modeled and said, okay, this is supposed to take, people do this with marketing all the time.
Hmm.
right? And it's like, all right, we're going to throw all this money at this marketing campaign. Well, you know what? It's been 3 months, hasn't worked. Well, no kidding, because it needed to take 7 months for it to take traction, right? That type
Yep.
of thing.
Yep.
So, and like you said, if they model this out ahead of time, they would go, oh, well, wait a minute, 7 months. We don't want to run that run rate or that burn rate on this initiative at this point. So we
Yeah,
won't
that's
even
not
do it.
something we can afford to do right now if they had modeled it out properly. And of course, modeling, as I said, is really codifying a set of assumptions. So it's hard to do if you don't have people that have some experience,
Right.
because it's experience and intuition is what gives you those assumptions to begin with, right? And so, a lot of times you see this whipsawing of starting stuff and stopping it, et cetera, because potentially the teams are, just less seasoned than other teams are.
Right. So, we've had a growing number of solo businesses and people, listening to this, as well as the larger companies and mid-sized companies. And I would challenge them that they could model too, based on what you just said. You may not know what you don't know, but there are other people within our influence that we could take our model to and go, hey, punch holes in this. Tell me what's good. Tell me what you don't like. Right. I mean, we could do those type of things, and then we wouldn't run into that initiative enthusiastically running down that path, finding, oh, geez, there's a cliff at the end of this path.
Yeah.
So I think this point you're making is so important for people, whether they're salespeople, which are really entrepreneurs in an entrepreneurial, role,
Yeah.
and or they're massive corporations that are not doing this, because I have seen hundreds of millions of dollars just blown up. Like they run it at something and it's just, oops, didn't work. Well, they never even looked at why it wouldn't work in the first place, or why it should work, or what the timeframes were. So I'm a big proponent about what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I told you we call it conscious iteration at speed. It's got 4 parts. Model the motion. That's the very first thing, right? Which is effectively build the plan or the model, measure the motion, analyze the measurements, and then based on that, build experiments to iterate, right? And it's just a cycle. But if you don't do the modeling part, you're sort of doing everything in a vacuum.
Right.
And it's why it's critical, and it just gives you so much context then against which to measure the actual performance.
Well, we wouldn't go jump out of a plane with a parachute without trying to like model it out ahead of time. I mean,
right.
So it's like, better check your equipment on the ground, guys and gals, right?
Yeah.
And figure out how fast your descent is, and should you be jumping into a mountainous range or not, those type of things. Landing on trees is not going to feel good no matter who you are.
Right.
So, Scott, I'm sure we've got some people going, okay, this makes sense, right? How do they get a hold of you? How do they get a hold of the company? What would be, if they wanted to learn more about?
scaleMatters.com is the website. You can email me directly at scott@scalematters.com. I will respond. I certainly, let me put it this way, I certainly read the first line of every email. So if you're emailing me in response to Doug's podcast, I will absolutely respond to it. So that's the best way, or info@scalematters.com.
And so in the subject line, put Doug's podcast. That'll probably be,
that would do the trick.
So Scott, I always love to ask this question of people like yourself who want to, run the companies. If someone wanted to, like, I know that CEOs and owners of companies, they told me this over and over. They don't like to be sold to, but they like to buy. So if somebody was going to approach you, not knowing you, like cold, they're just coming out, what would be I would say something you could say to them that would give them some indication on how to approach a guy like you in a position that you're in from the sales side?
Sure. So I don't know if this is as much related to the position I'm in or more just my personality type, but I'm into efficient communication, right? Start with, what's the problem you solve? Because I can then in 2 seconds say, okay, well, that's a problem we have, or that's not a problem we have. or it's a problem we have, but it's not here on my priority list, right? So I mean, I think the advice would be trust that people are able to understand what is important for them to be dealing with at any given time, right? So then be very crisp in saying what problem you solve. I don't need to know how you solve it yet, but I need to know that you're solving a problem that's important to me. And so, for example, the 12 emails I get a day from people who are trying to sell us offshore development help, just waste.
Yeah.
We've got a partner. We love our partner. It doesn't show up as a problem for us, right? And so I'm just not even going to respond, right? I mean, I've already wasted my time having to see that that's what that email was about, right? Sure. So, but what's my single highest priority right now? It's raising money for my company, right? So if I had a email and the line was, we invest in companies, and the profile was very much like ours, I'm going to say, let's talk, right? As opposed to, I get a lot of outreach from private equity firms and growth stage investors, and we're much earlier than them, so I know we're not a fit,
right?
So that's not a solution to me, and I will more likely ignore that. And so to me, start with the problem so that the person doesn't have to waste a lot of time doing mental acrobatics to know whether this is worth reading any further.
I love that. And a little hint to people: before you send that email, do some research and figure out what the heck the relevancy of that is. So guys like yourself, Scott, or I, or everyone else who's getting these emails, like you just said, it's not only a waste of our time and energy, but it's also a frustration point that it creates, because what I've learned is I look at them, I go, oh, not another one. Oh, not another one. Right. And I'm starting to, like, the four that sent them before the fifth one, I'm even more upset about the fifth one because I'm wasting more time. So my emotional levels go up on these things. I had somebody send me one the other day that said, your manufacturing company could use our help. And it's like, I don't have a manufacturing company, right? So it's like, I'm like, I'm trying to focus on something else, right? So, but if they just had done a little bit of research, they would have seen that we're not a manufacturing company, but they could see that we could support manufacturing companies. So if they said, look, we help people like you support manufacturing companies, which we have worked with quite a bit, then that would have caught my attention more so.
Yeah.
And, so I agree with you. So, number one, make sure that the problem that you're looking to solve is relevant and meaningful to you.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't even care personally if someone does cold outreach to me with something that's completely irrelevant. It's not like I get offended by that, right? I mean, my name's sitting there in a sales loft cadence or an outreach cadence for them, right? I understand what's going on. What I get offended by is the fact that it's not easy to say, no, take me off your list, right? Because they force you to change something in the subject line, or right. And so what I get offended by is I have to get the 5 additional emails from that person. And then when the last couple start making comments like, well, obviously growing your company is an important priority of yours right now. It's kind of like, stop the bullshit, right? I mean, yes, it is, but what you're selling isn't an important part of me doing that, right?
That's called rapport break, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, again, I don't mind the fact that people miss, but there's got to be an easy way to stop it after the first miss.
That makes sense. Scott, thanks so much for being here at the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. I really appreciate the analytical approach you're bringing to this, because a lot of our guests are super brilliant, but we're kind of drilling down into the analytical side, which kind of balances off some of the the other, folks who aren't as methodical, if you will. So I appreciate you doing so.
I mean, if you're really good at the data and analytics side, I mean, think about it. What you're doing is giving leaders just a lot tighter dials that they can turn. It's the only way to really get precise in the way that you run your shop. So, Doug, thanks for having me. I appreciated being here with you.
I wrote these down. I thought this was really important. The top companies, the one percenters, if you will, they have a religious attention to finding the friction or the inefficiencies in their company or the inefficiencies in the process. I thought that was really interesting because many companies that, I have looked at or talked to, CEOs of companies, sometimes they just look like, okay, top line, you know what? We're doing great here, but we're not doing great here. But overall, we've got this kind of profitability that's working for the company. But when you look at the optimization through every single division or everything, single process, and those of you who are just have roles like selling, when you're looking through your optimization of the selling process, you'll find things that you go, wow, okay, we could improve this, even if it was by 2%. Because if you think about it, if you did 2 or 3% increase over 5 or 6 things, that compounding interest, what does it bring you in the long term? It brings you a lot more money, a lot more profit, and you work easier. So it's kind of really one of those ultimate leverage points. And then they align themselves with the highest point. In other words, you don't work on everything all at once because, that'd be like throwing all the balls up in the air and trying to juggle them, right? But you can work on one thing, get that down and see how it affects the other things, and then move on and move on and move on. And the third thing they said was they constantly are experimenting with it. In other words, they have an experimentation culture. So they're going to try something, but they're putting models around that process to understand how to measure and when to, pull the plug, so to speak, if it's not working. And as important, not to pull it too early, because if you pull the plug too early, you don't realize the full value of what you could have out of it. So if you like this episode, please give it a 5-star review. If you yourself want to get yourself into this client acquisition and expansion mode, in other words, you want to get to the top 1%, be a nonstop earner yourself, or you want your company and your people to be that way, reach out to me at doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. And let's have a chat and see what we can do. If you are an expert in something and you think it will fit the CEO sales strategies model, how to sell to CEOs, how to build revenue profits in the company, how to improve sales and capacities. If you're that person or you know somebody who is, reach out to us at YouMatter, YOUMATTER, at ceosalesstrategies.com. And let us know. We answer all inquiries and we will get back to you and let you know, does it fit or does it not fit? And if you're interested in being on the waiting list for our upcoming academy on how you build your client acquisition and revenue growth strategies within your company and how you are efficiently selling as a nonstop 1% earner, reach out to us again at YouMatter at ceosalesstrategies.com. And we'll get you onto the waiting list and let you know how things are going and let you know when that's going to be kicking off in 2023. Until next time, go out and sell something, sell a lot of it, sell it profitably, play win-win. That means you win, they win. It's the happiest sale in the earth. That is what spawns more referrals than anything. And follow up with people and let them know you care. Until next time, this is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. To your success.